client's going to have needs. Right? So you just go through the why, the who, what, where, when, and the how. Right? So this becomes your part. Once you take this, you create the how, the game plan. So why is the why important? Let's talk about buyers real quick. Why would why be important?
Well, depending on why they're selling their home. If
Talking buyers, just let's talk
Oh,
buyers.
Okay.
So why would why be important?
Why they're buying versus whether it'd be better for them to rent versus buy.
No,
or
like if somebody comes to you, Jenny, I'm going to buy a house, and I need to, be in something, hopefully before school.
Okay.
So you know that why, right? It could be school related, it could be work related, it could be timetable related. It could not be important at all. There might not be a why. I want to buy a house just because I'm in that time of life where I want to buy a house, right? If you know the why, you know the timetable probably pretty quickly, right? If they go, oh, well, if they're sellers, like, oh, we're being transferred, that's why we're selling. And they probably want to it's probably going to be vacant pretty soon, they're going to probably want it sold pretty soon. So the why is different, right? The who, obviously, who's involved, but who's the decision maker, right? That's really, really important. Like, I've been to listing appointments with other agents in our office, and we've sat through the whole thing, and apparently who we're talking to isn't the end decision maker, whether it's the husband, the wife, And sometimes that's just part of their game, right? I'll meet with them, and then we'll whittle it down to one or two, and then I'll bring you in to make a decision. So, we spent an hour, and the husband's like, oh yeah, I'm not even on the deed. It's my wife's house. Really? So prepare yourself ahead of time for those kind of things. What? What are they doing? Buying, selling? I mean, that's pretty obvious. Renting, leasing their house out. Where? With buyers, where? Anybody have a buyer that goes, I want to be in this vicinity, and then they start sending you houses out here? Right? So what I do is when somebody tells me here, I really think they're talking about there. Right? Just in case. So I always like when people are like, I want to be like north of Union Hills and west of like 59th Avenue. And you're like, okay, did you know there's a really cool house at like Greenway and 43rd Avenue that you might like? Oh yeah, well let's look at it, right? It's out of their parameters. So I think people in their minds start there, but then they slowly will start progressing outside those boundaries once they've gotten into the process a little bit. I wouldn't immediately only show them houses out here, try to keep stuff in their original circle, but I always expand at least a half a mile or so.
Especially if they're new to the area.
Yes.
I mean, you say, where do you work?
Right.
Where do you have to drive every day?
Yep.
This
Yep.
is a parameter that we want to look at.
Yep, but yeah, a lot of people, I ask them, like, that's a good question, like, well, what kind of commute do you want? Well, I'd like to be 30 miles from my office. Well, that's great. You start at the office, expand out about 35, 40 miles, and that's a good radius for them. That's a huge radius, but you never know. People that are new to the area. Yeah, I had a guy moving from St. Louis. We looked at stuff at Goodyear, Litchfield Park, Levine, and he ended up buying an Awatuki. But he worked along the Broadway Road there by the airport, and he wanted to see. And what's interesting is people are like, oh, well, Goodyear, Litchfield Park is so cheaper. Right? So you go out there and like, oh, it's nice. And you take it like Awatuki where the prices are twice as much. He's like, oh yeah, I like this much better. And you're like, I wish I just knew that ahead of time somehow. Right?
I got a call emergency call 9 o'clock at night from Cheryl Weathersby. Emergency realtor needed.
Cool.
Her nephew's looking for a place, but they've been working with a guy who's showing them homes in Queen Creek, and he's working on 75th Avenue in Van Buren.
What?
I know.
So did you get the deal?
Maybe. They stayed with him for one more day because he says, oh, I can show you on the west side. So they stayed with him for one more day, but they didn't buy anything. But I'm showing him Nikki's house.
Oh, is that the one that you showed Nikki's house too?
Yeah. I think that'll be perfect. They can get on the 303 and go out there, 101, 303.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah, good. All right. So we talked about the when. Obviously, if you know the why, you're probably going to know the when. and then the game plan. This is your responsibility. Your responsibility is to digest all this and create that. And a lot of times when people are moving from out of state, they're going to rely on some of your expertise. But like Jan said, you're going to have to show them 4 or 5 different areas, right? Just so they can see the difference, right? Here's what you get with Levine versus Ahwatukee. Yes, they're both close to work. Levine is a lot cheaper, but it's kind of hood. Ahwatukee is the world's biggest cul-de-sac. So if you don't mind driving around the mountain every day, so, you know, you kind of got to lay that out for them. The worst thing to do is find them something quickly and not show them a vast variety. Like if you only, like Jan was just saying, if they were only looking at houses in Queen Creek and they didn't realize that there was other opportunities, that's when you get buyer's remorse, right? Like, oh, I drive by this other subdivision, it's super nice. Why didn't we look here, right? So that's why you got to digest these questions and give them the best opportunity to find something that's going to fit inside those 5 questions. All right, always consider what options you have. Write them down. I just had a seller who got a low appraisal. So I wrote them out an email and I gave them the 4 options. Here are your 4 options. 1, cancel. Make the buyer walk away, don't sell the house, or make the buyer come up with more money. 2, negotiate somewhere between where we're at in that appraisal. 3, talk to them about carrying a second. Say, I'll concede a second, you can pay me the difference. So I put that in an email for them, and they decide just to lower the house to the appraised value and sell it.
What's the line
As far
between
as-
what a house has sold for, what they've agreed upon, and an appraisal? Difference between that?
This last one was $20,000. Almost 30. Yeah, they just agreed that it was 24 was the actual number. They were just like, we'll just sell it. We've already made up our mind to sell it. They sold it to the renters. The people were renting it from them. And they were like, that's fine. At this point, just well be done. So yeah, I mean, it's all negotiable at that point. All hell breaks loose and the appraisal comes in low. And if you're on the seller side, negotiate out the concessions. You know, that's hidden money that you can get back. It's tough. I've had my fair share of deals canceled because of low appraisals. You can do a second. If the owner, let's say they owe 140 and the appraisal comes in at 170, but the contract price is 200. They can tell them, listen, I'll sell it to you. We're going to sell it at 200. You're going to take a loan at 170, and then I'm going to carry the second at 30.
Buyer's agent, would you allow your client to do that?
Yeah. Probably not.
Okay.
As a buyer's agent, I think, as a seller's agent, absolutely.
Right, but as a buyer's
But
agent, why would?
it's still risky on the seller's side. Yeah, probably not. It would have to be talent experience, but no. I mean, if it was like the only house that fit, I might negotiate the second a little bit differently. You know, carry it out 30 years, don't do any balloon payments. You know, something like that. Like, sometimes you have a buyer that wants something very specific, and it just doesn't exist, and then you find it,
Gotcha.
right? And you like, here's your options. But again, I write down the options. I said, listen, here's your options. 1, we start over. 2, we negotiate out a second or a carry on the seller's side, and we pay this rate, and we pay this payment every month, and for this many months, and let them make their decision, right? I'm doing a deal where we are going to do a second. We're definitely going to do a second because we're going from FHA to conventional. We can't qualify for conventional, so we're going to qualify for FHA, and we're going to carry a little bit on the second, on the final sales price. So it's like 10 grand, and they're going to pay it over 10 years. It's like 125 bucks a month.
And they can do that on conventional?
No, because the loan's only be FHA,
Right?
right? So when you go to title, what happens is the first lien holder is the bank who's doing the new loan. The second lien holder is the seller who files a trust deed for the amount that he's carrying the second on.
But you have to work all that out with the lender, right? His
Lender doesn't care.
They don't care?
Nope. There's special lenders that do, they're not lenders, they're like I don't even know what you would call them. They're the ones that set up the second. They collect the payments. They keep track of what's been paid, when it's been paid, kind of like a bank. There's companies that just do that. So you go through them, and they'll charge the seller like 1.5% on the transaction. So you guys can negotiate that out too. For this person, it's the best deal they can get. They're buying the house at there's probably $40,000 in equity. So might as well take it. Now the house needs some work, and they realize that if they're in there, their thing is if I'm in there 2 years, I can sell it, pay off my first, pay off the second, and then I'll have tons of equity left over. So, and it'll be tax-free. So it's a good opportunity for this buyer, but very specific. Sellers, here's the cool thing. They don't pay that second. The seller cannot foreclose as long as they're paying the first. But if they do get foreclosed on, they could get paid off because there would be equity. Now, if you remember in 07, 08, when the market went down, seconds got screwed because there was no equity. As long as the market keeps going up, you're fairly safe. Depends how much. Now, let's say you're doing a full seller carry. There is no first lien holder. The seller could foreclose on the buyer and take back the property. So there's some advantages. That's a whole different class, but there's some stuff in there.
Yeah, we ought to have one just on that.
We don't, because it doesn't happen very often. Maybe I'm going to do a class of just weird circumstances. Talk about seller carries and stuff like that.
That's what we need.
I'll add that, okay? But always talk about the pros and cons. Here, as an agent, it's very important. They're relying on you 100%.